Hello, and welcome to the Quoted interview series, where we get to the bottom of what's top of mind with rock stars in the media landscape, be they journalists, editors, columnists, media owners, thought leaders, executives, you name it. I'm Lou Carlozo, the editor in chief of Quoted, coming to you. I would usually say from the Quoted Quonset hut in Chicago, but this time I'm in a hotel room in suburban Baltimore. And on today's show, what a treat. We have Clayton Weimers, the executive director of RSF USA, based in Washington, D.C. Clayton oversees an office which monitors press freedom across English-speaking North America and advances RSF's global priorities to advocate for journalist safety and everyone's right to information. His writing on press freedom has appeared in publications that include the Washington Post, Newsweek, The Hill, and The Independent. He originally joined RSF USA as its deputy director for advocacy after a career in political campaigns. He also holds a Master of Arts in International Relations from a university in my hometown, the University of Chicago, where his thesis was Frankenstein's Monster, Nationalism and Foreign Policy in Autocratic Regimes. Clayton, welcome to the Quoted interview series.
Thank you for having me. It's been a while since someone has referenced my master's thesis and also my hometown, Chicago.
Oh, even better. Wow. Which neighborhood?
I grew up in Lincoln Park.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, I'm in North Center, 2 miles due west of Wrigley. So,
Yeah, I grew up about 10 blocks south of Wrigley, not to dox myself on your podcast here, but yeah, I grew up as a kid going walking to Cubs games.
yeah, I can walk in about 20 minutes, I think. So, I'll see you right by the bleachers, I suppose.
I can't afford to go to Cubs games anymore. It's changed.
Yeah, who can, right?
Yeah.
Now, leaping in, Quoted co founder Dan Simon, I was blown away by this. He made it a point to highlight the work of RSF North America, RSF USA, at the Quoted Holiday Media Mixer in Manhattan recently. I want to get to the heart of it because people really need to know what you're doing. So, why do people need to support what you're doing? Why now? And how do we support you?
Sure. RSF, we call ourselves the world's largest organization that's devoted to the right to access reliable information. And traditionally, we think of this as press freedom, but that connotes this idea that we're protecting the rights of journalists or that we consider journalists some kind of special class of citizen, which is really not the case. Journalism and journalists, we protect them both as a means to an end, and that end is an informed populace. You can't have a democratic society without access to reliable information, without informed people. And journalism is just one of the ways that we help people get access to reliable information. You look all over the world, and there's so many threats to journalism and by proxy to our access to information and our democracy.
Yeah. And wow, but there are 1,500 things we could talk about to that end. I would love it if you can bring us into the present, talk about what you're working on now. Obviously, a lot of sensitive things you can't discuss, but maybe some things that you can share with us.
Yeah, so you mentioned that I oversee our office here in DC, and we kind of have a dual hat purpose in this office. On the one hand, we're keeping an eye on the English speaking Americas, as you said, and really trying to push back against what we see as an erosion of press freedom that's really taken root, especially in the United States recently. But also because of our position in DC, the international priorities sooner or later make their way to my desk as well. And that can be advocating for a high profile imprisoned journalist like Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong, who was just convicted in was really a sham trial by a kangaroo court, and is now awaiting sentencing and is likely to spend the rest of his life in jail. This is a man in his late 70s who's now been in prison for 5 years for the crime of journalism. It can
Jeez.
also mean advocating at international levels through bodies like the UN or the European Union to introduce new protections for journalism or access to information. So it really goes from the individual level of a journalist on the ground to the macro level of the systems and rules that are in place that govern how we get information.
Normally when the camera cuts to me, I'm smiling, but there's nothing to smile about here. This is just really, really sad. And you alluded to the pressures on media in North America right now. I'd love it if you could pinpoint some of the biggest issues that you think media is facing as we head into 2026, especially regarding press freedom in North America.
Of course. So, if we're known for anything at RSF, it's our index on press freedom, where we rank every country in the world according to how free the press is. We do a big, colorful map. If I were actually in my office and not from home, you'd see it right behind me. But one thing that I always try to point out is that the United States has been sliding in these rankings for the better part of a decade, to the point where in 2025, we're now ranked 57th out of 180 countries, from a high point of about, it was 22nd about a decade ago. That tells me that there's not any one politician or political party, or even one particular problem that's causing press freedom to erode in this country. And if you look at the indicators that we measure, we have five categories of indicator that form subscores for these rankings. The US has declined on all of them. And so some of
Mm.
the obvious ones are safety. We see more journalists being attacked or arrested arbitrarily. That's easy to count in the data. And unfortunately, the numbers are pretty stark there. But it's also things that you might not immediately think of as having to do with press freedom, like the economics of the news. But you think about it a little bit, and if the news can't sustain itself, then newspapers disappear, local TV and radio stations disappear, journalists lose jobs, people lose access to information. We have less accountability on our local governments or local companies. And that's the story that we see all across America, is a worsening news desert problem, where over 30 million Americans live in what we would consider a news desert, and many million more live in a county where there's not a single local news source at all, or where there's no professional journalist working. That's a serious problem. It leads to another key problem in the US news media, which is a crisis of trust. The American people are turning away from the news as a source of information. And it's not that surprising when you consider that their local news, which they trust and which is able to speak to their community, is gone. And what replaces it is, in the best case scenario, very New York or DC or LA centric media, but more realistically, it's slop on social media. It's deliberate disinformation or propaganda. Information vacuums up, information abhors a vacuum. And so when you take away reliable sources of information, something will plug that hole.
Yeah, it amazes me that social media, for whatever reason, actually has the word media in it. You just need a loud megaphone and crazy views, and it seems like you can compete with a major news outlet. Now, you mentioned some of these elements, and by no means is my list comprehensive, and it may not include the most important things as you see them, but there's been this caving on the part of media outlets that are capitulating to the current administration. Now, some of that comes from billionaire media owners, one of whom once bragged, democracy dies in darkness. We've got media companies making these stunning, stunning surrenders to what are probably very unfounded lawsuits, and a steady drip of the terminology fake news. It doesn't fit the reality, but it fits on a bumper sticker and it appeals to caveman brains. It just seems like it's an unprecedented time. I'm wondering what you make of it, especially with the dropping ranking of the United States for media trust. And how does the media in its day and age, whether it's individual outlets or whatever way you see it, how does the media hold its ground?
That's a key question. About this time last year, I wrote an article urging the owners of media not to capitulate to these frivolous lawsuits that Donald Trump has launched for his entire career, but now carry a little bit of extra oomph because of all of the powers that the presidency bestows upon him. And there's really been an uneven record here. So the media seem to be dividing themselves into two camps as to how to deal with this issue. There's the camp of the media organizations that decide to settle these lawsuits and pay out a tremendous amount of money to the president. And then there are the media outlets that are choosing to stand their ground and fight the lawsuits, and in some cases, sue the administration. And so, not to pile on here, but I think everyone is familiar with the cases of Disney and Paramount. The president sued ABC News, which Disney owns, and CBS News, which Paramount owns, in very frivolous lawsuits that most experts agree he didn't really have a good chance of winning. But they decided to settle anyway. And if they're making that decision, they're calculating that it is better in their long term not to fight the president for all sorts of reasons. And you look at these two companies, they're massive global corporations with billions of dollars of assets, among which news media is probably one of the smallest, least profitable of all of them. And from that perspective, if you're thinking about your shareholders, I understand, it's an easy business decision to say it's not worth fighting. We'd rather just spend $16 million to make this problem go away, not take the PR hit, not risk investigations, allow our merger to go through, what have you. But I think that's really short-sighted. And I really urge anyone who is in the business of reporting the news to also think of yourself as being in the business of defending the First Amendment. And that brings me to the other class of media organizations, the ones that are fighting back. And I think they deserve a lot of kudos for doing it because it's not cheap and it's time consuming. So the New York Times is being sued. They're fighting back. The Wall Street Journal is being sued. They're fighting back. The Des Moines Register and Gannett, their owner, is being sued. They're fighting back. The BBC, the latest victim of one of Trump's frivolous lawsuits, they're fighting back. That's the way to go. Capitulating to a bully just invites that bully to come back and take your lunch money once again. And we've already seen that play out. Disney paid the settlement, and they keep getting attacked by the president. CBS paid the settlement, and he keeps truth socialing about CBS News, complaining about 60 Minutes. Paying him off is not going to make the problem go away. Fighting back is the only way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I got to say, even before this interview, I was very concerned. I think as you continue to lay this out for me, I'm even more concerned. I'm asking this personally and also asking it for people watching this video who may be wondering the same thing. I mean, what the hell can I do as a reporter to stem the tide here and to get behind what Reporters Without Borders is doing?
Well, as a reporter, the best thing you can do is just do your job ethically and truthfully and keep doing what you're doing and make sure that you're producing a product worth reading or worth listening to or worth watching. A lot of this is not on reporters. I generally don't have a lot of fear that individual journalists are going to submit to these kinds of authoritarian impulses or self-censor or anything like that. I'm more concerned about what the more business-oriented owners are thinking, because they have competing interests on that front, and they didn't necessarily get into this because that their mission is to report the news. Journalists themselves are very resilient, and they've had to come through an era of huge job losses and a shrinking marketplace, and now political and indeed violent threats against their well-being. So it's also incumbent on organizations like ours to make sure they have everything they need to defend themselves. And so for any reporter who's listening here, if you have a problem, come to us. We're at rsf.org. You can find our contact information. We have a number of different solutions. And if we can't help you, we can refer you to someone who can, whether it's legal support, whether it's digital security support, whether it's physical security support. We're going to be rolling out some new programs in 2026 to increase our resources that we can provide directly to journalists at risk. One of the things that we've seen this year is a wave of violence while journalists are covering ICE-related protests or immigration raids. I think particularly of a couple weeks in June in Los Angeles, where we counted over 60 incidents of law enforcement violently attacking a journalist, sending them to the ER with concussions. I know one reporter lost a finger. I know of many reporters who lost their cameras from damage or confiscation. And these are freelance reporters, independent, small newsroom reporters who don't have tremendous resources behind them. They don't have the training to deal with what is effectively becoming a war zone. And so that tells me that our organization needs to work even harder to make sure they have the equipment they need to stay safe, the training they need to stay safe, and the confidence that if something happens, we're going to be there for them. And so that's my message to them is we're here for you.
Yeah, that is fabulous, and it's needed more than ever. I cannot imagine if any member of the current administration lost a finger, how many posts would go up on X, how many death threats, and yet one of our colleagues loses a finger in an entirely unjustified action. And there's going to be people, God, I don't know why, even rejoicing out there. Yeah, that reporter deserved it. Fake news, fake news, fake news. No, we've got to put a stop to it. And I'm encouraging all of my colleagues out there to take in what Clayton is saying, take it to heart, and let's get behind doing our jobs well and fearlessly. Now, as we head off into the quoted sunset, I wanted to ask you something that maybe is a little personal. That, look, with your background, with that master's degree, with the Frankenstein essay, the thesis, right? You could be doing a host of many different things, incredible things. You worked on political campaigns. Why are you doing this? And where does the passion for it come from?
In all honesty, when I was a teenager, I was convinced I was going to be a journalist. That is what I wanted to go to college to study, and I got knocked off that path by happenstance. Really, I ended up studying Russian. That took me into a different direction, and then found my way into political campaigns, kind of accidentally. But when the opportunity to join RSF came my way, it really seemed like a bit of a homecoming to what I initially had set out to do when I was, maybe 15 years old, working on my high school newspaper. And so I've never worked as a professional journalist, but I am privileged that now I get to use my particular skill set, which is different from journalism, in service of journalism and in service of something I really believe in. I love that I have a job where I get up in the morning and have absolutely no doubt about what I'm going to work to do. I never have to question whether it's worth it, or whether I want to keep doing it. So that's a privilege. I've had jobs I've dreaded going into in the past, and I know everyone probably has in their life. I never have that problem at RSF.
Indeed. And in some ways, if I may say so, it's even better than being a journalist in your situation because you're helping to lead us, you're helping to guide us, you're helping to protect us. And so, speaking on behalf of me, and I think on behalf of the Quoted organization, we are so grateful for the work that you're doing. Clayton, thank you so much for being on the Quoted interview series.
Thank you for having me. And I just also want to say thank you, not just to you for having me, but to Quoted and to Dan Simon, who have consistently been tremendous partners, helping us make more connections and supporting us in any way they can. And so it's very much appreciated.
Yeah, we call Dan Simon, or at least I do, the gold standard. He is one of the best media CEOs out there. So thanks for tipping your hat to him. And thank you, one and all, for tuning into the Quoted interview series. Our Chicago based producer is Ken Montone. A special thanks to the co founders of Quoted, Dan Simon, of course, and Matt Neller. Thanks as well to the Quoted A team, Kelly Jura, Ashlyn Anderson, Callie Chambers, Ray Lynn, and Rebecca Young. Our Columbia College Chicago intern is Jacob Areza. Don't forget, Quoted is the world's #1 platform for bringing journalists, PR, and subject matter experts together, not just in service of the story, but also in the business of building community and connections. I'm Lou Carlozo, your host, the editor-in-chief of Quoted. Don't forget to check out my financial services podcast, Bankadelic, which you can hear via Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud. Until next time, stay true, stay tuned, and stay suddenly connected.